In this video, we will learn about a very important concept in OOP called inheritance. In inheritance, we have the concept of base class and derived classes. Basically, derived classes or child classes are the classes that inherits members from the parent class, and parent classes or base class are the class that other classes inherits from. In order to explain the concept of inheritance, we will start with a basic example and then jump into this example. So let's go down here and create a class called base, like this, which will have a private data member of char letter and public data and function members, which we will have int value and a void set function, which will basically set the value. So I'll take an integer value and then set it to the data member called value, like this. Now let's go down here and create a derived class called derived, like this, and this class will have nothing inside it. So none, for example. Now I want this derived class to inherit from the base class. How to do this? Well, right after the name of the class, you will add a colon and say public base. What you're doing right now is that you're telling the compiler that I want the derived class to inherit the data members and function members of the base class. And so this is inheritance, when you inherit something from another class. Now, why do we use inheritance? Well, basically inheritance is used for code reusability. If I have the derived class, which will have the same data member and function members of the base class, instead of copy and pasting it, this is redundancy, what I could do is that I could use inheritance in order to get or inherit all of those data members inside my derived class. And let's go ahead and see them. If I go down here in the main and create a derived object by saying derived like this, if I'm going to go ahead and say derived dot like this, I'm using the dot notation, as you can see, I could access the set and the value data member. Basically, these are the data and function member of the base class, and I was able to access them using my derived class. Why? Because the derived class actually inherits from the base class. Also, inheritance is called an is-a relationship. What's an is-a relationship? It is when we consider the object of derived class as if it is an object of the base class. So right here with the object derived, I'm using the dot notation and I could access set and value. So I could say set, for example, the value to 12, and I could say cout derived dot value like this. Now let me go ahead and run my code to see what we will get as an output. So as you can see, we got 12. Now you can see clearly when I say derived dot like this, you can see that we cannot access letter. Why? Because it is set as private. Whatever is set as private, it is hidden. So basically right here, the char letter data member is encapsulated or hidden. That's why I cannot access it. But if I put it as protected, and this is a new access modifier, when you set something as protected, it is considered private. It is similar to private actually, but the main difference is that with inheritance, when used in the concept of inheritance, when a data member is set as protected, it can be accessed within the derived class. What do I mean? Basically, if I had a void function right here, like this, if I can go ahead and say this arrow, as you can see, letter, as you can see, there is no error. I could access it. But if I go outside right here and say derived dot, I still cannot access it because protected is similar to private. The main difference is that inside the derived class, you can access it, but with private, I cannot. So if I set this to private, as you can see, we got an error. I cannot access it because it is private. It belongs to the base class. So that's why we use protected inside the concept of inheritance. And as you can see right now, I can access it. So this is a bit of an introduction to inheritance. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to delete all of this right now, and let's go to this example. So inside this class called human, we have private data members like string name and int age. We also have this constructor that initializes these data members, and we have two getter functions which respectively returns name and age. Now what we want to do is we want this student class to be a derived class or to inherit from the human class. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to say public like this, public human. What I'm doing here is that I'm inheriting whatever the human class has. I'm inheriting the data member and function member of this human class. Now when we use inheritance, we always want to use protected in order to access these data members inside our derived class. Now what I want to have extra for the student class is that I want to have a private string major data member. So with this defined, what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to go ahead and say public, and I'm going to define the student constructor. So I'm going to say student like this. Now we need to get an error. Now as you can see, we have an error. It says no default constructor exists for class human. Well, what does this actually mean? The compiler right now is giving us an error, and it says to us, or it's saying to us, excuse me, that it doesn't know how to initialize the constructor human. Well, why is that? Well, basically, when you are using the concept of inheritance, always when a class inherits another class, the base class constructor must always be called before the derived class constructor. So right here, when we are building the derived class constructor, we need to first initialize the human constructor, the base class constructor. So what should we do? As you can see here, we are seeing that the constructor human must take a name and an age. So there is parameters for this constructor. What I'm going to do in order to initialize this constructor, I'm going to pass the student constructor a string name and an int age and something extra, which will be the major. It belongs to the student class. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open the initializer list and call the human constructor. And when I call the human constructor, now I could initialize it, or initialize the data members, by passing name and age like this. And right now we have no errors. We successfully initialized our student constructor and our human constructor. So always keep in mind, in inheritance, when a class inherits another class, the constructor of the base class must always be initialized first before the derived class constructor. Now, let's go ahead and initialize the major data member by saying this major equal to major, like this. Now, let's go down here and create a void get student info. So get student info like this. I'll simply use cout in order to display the student info. Now, because we have inheritance right now, what I could do here is I could say cout like this arrow, and as you can see, we are able to access age, name, and get name. Those are the data members and function members that belongs to the base class. And because of inheritance, we can access them. But because of the protected right here, we can only access these data members inside the student class, not outside in the main. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to use cout this name. I'm accessing the protected data member, and I'm going to say the same thing right here. So this age like this, and I'm going to say right here cout this major, and major belongs to the student class. And so let's go down here inside the main. I'm going to create a base class, or excuse me, a human object, and I'm going to call it a human like this. Any human should have a name like John, for example, age, for example, 19. Now I'm going to create a student object. I'm going to call it student1. Now the student object right here, what it will have is that I'm going to use a human, the human object I created right now, and I'm going to access the name. So I'm going to say get name. So this will be the name of our student. Next, we will have human.getAge. And right now, let's say this human, or John, is a comp size student, like this. Now that I have finished creating my objects, I'm going to go down here and say student1 dot. As you can see, we are able to access getAge and getName, which respectively belong for the human class, or the base class. But because these data members are set to protected, that's why we are not able to access them right here. But we are able to access them inside the implementation of the derived class because of protected. What protected does, it simply hides the data members, but in the concept of inheritance, it allows the derived class to access them inside its implementation. So right now, if I go ahead and say get student info, everything should work properly. I'm going to go ahead, compile, and then launch my code. As you can see, John 19 and major is comp sci. So everything right now is working properly. Alright, this is it about inheritance. It is a very simple yet very important concept in OOP. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date for the next C++ tutorial video.